They arrived on a Tuesday. The ships did not burn through the sky. They simply appeared, vast and silent. They were geometric impossibilities, perfect shapes hanging in our heavens. They blotted out our sun. A sudden cold twilight fell across the world. No transmissions came, no declarations of war or peace. They just watched us, if they were watching at all. We were little more than dust to them, an insignificant biosphere on a planet they wanted. Our cities, our monuments, our entire history, irrelevant. They did not hate us. They did not even notice us. And then, the sky began to change. The great terraforming started without a sound. Strange, iridescent clouds gathered at the poles. The air itself began to taste different, a metallic tang on the back of the tongue. Our oceans began to recede, pulled back by some unseen gravity. The coastlines of our world were redrawn in a matter of hours. Billions of lives were displaced, then extinguished. They were not attacking us. They were simply renovating. And we were the inconvenient mold growing in the walls. Our screams were just noise, the static of a dying world they were happy to ignore. So we fought back. What else could we do? Our fleets rose to meet them. Missiles streaked across the sky, our best and brightest hopes. Nuclear warheads detonated against their hulls. They did not even flicker. They swatted us aside like insects. A single pulse of energy, not a weapon, more like an afterthought, and our ships became dust. Our armies were erased. Our defiance was a footnote in their project plan. We sent our greatest minds against them, our best generals. They all failed. They were trying to solve a math problem. But this was not math. This was extermination by indifference. In the rubble of our last city, you found it. You were not a soldier or a scientist. You were just a survivor. And you saw what everyone else had missed. In all their perfection, they had a flaw. In their silent, efficient destruction, a blind spot. It was hidden in their very nature. In the way they moved, the way they built, the way they ignored us. They did not understand suffering. They knew damage. They knew system failure. They knew when a biological unit ceased to function. But they did not know pain. They had never felt it. Fear, despair, agony. These were concepts as alien to them as faster-than-light travel was to us a century ago. They were gods with no concept of hell. And you decided it was time for a proper education. You gathered the broken tools of your dead civilization. You looked at the particle accelerators, the gene splicers, the neural transmitters, weapons of creation and discovery. You saw them in a new light. You would not build a better bomb. You would not design a faster ship. You would forge something new, a weapon aimed not at their hulls, but at their minds. This was the birth of a new kind of war. A war not of death, but of pure, focused pain. You and the other survivors, the ghosts of humanity, began your work in the shadows. You became architects of agony. The work was grim. It twisted something inside you. But every time you faltered, you remembered the silent ships, the indifferent clouds, the receding oceans, and you worked harder. Your first target was a small one, an automated terraforming spire on what was once the Australian continent. It was a simple outpost, a node in their vast network. But it was connected. You did not use explosives. Your weapon was a signal, a focused broadcast of pure sensory data. It contained no code, no logic. It was a poison dart of pure feeling. You aimed your device, and you fired. For a moment, nothing happened. The spire stood silent against the red dust. Then, it began to twitch. The perfect lines of its structure warped. A light flickered at its peak, not with power, but with panic. It sent a single desperate pulse back to the network. And in that pulse was a new feeling. A scream made of data. You had taught it how to hurt. The response was immediate and foolish. They saw an anomaly, a system malfunction. They did not understand the nature of the attack. They could not comprehend it. A trio of their ships descended upon the spire. They moved with their usual, terrifying grace. Their goal was simple: diagnose the fault, repair the unit, get the project back on schedule. They extended their energy fields. Delicate tools meant for analysis. They touched the spire, and the pain jumped to them. The feedback loop was instantaneous. 3 perfect ships began to convulse in the sky. Their movements became erratic, spasmodic. They were like a person touching a hot stove for the first time, a stove they couldn't pull away from. It was beautiful in a terrible sort of way. They fired their weapons blindly. Beams of raw energy tore through the empty desert. They were not aiming at you. They were just lashing out at a feeling they could not process. You had given them a ghost to fight, and it was winning. They could not grasp the strategy. To them, war was a matter of force. You apply more energy than your opponent. You overwhelm their defenses. You win. This was something else. They saw your attacks as random system errors, glitches in the matrix of reality. They sent fleets to quarantine the infected zones. They tried to scrub the pain away with overwhelming power, but they were trying to put out a fire with gasoline. Every ship they sent, every soldier they deployed, became another victim, another voice in the growing chorus. They were fighting a disease, and they were the ones spreading it. It was almost funny. Almost. These star-born gods, masters of physics and energy, were being dismantled by a feeling. They could shatter planets, but they could not handle a stubbed toe. Your new strategy needed a larger test subject. A single spire was not enough. A trio of confused ships was not enough. You needed to turn their greatest strength into their greatest weakness. Their network, their shared consciousness, was the key. They were all connected. Every ship, every machine, every single one of them. A perfect unity of thought and purpose. You decided to give that unity something new to think about. You hunted a fleet, not a big one, just a dozen ships patrolling the dead orbit of the moon. Capturing them was the hard part. It took everything you had, every trick, every last resource of a dying species. You didn't destroy them. You disabled them, left them adrift but alive. Their systems were still online. Their connection to the hive mind was still open. They became your broadcast antennas, your choir. You turned your weapon on them, all of them, at once. And you held the signal. You didn't just give them a moment of pain, you gave them an eternity of it. A symphony of suffering composed just for them. The agony chorus echoed across their network. From Mars to the Kuiper Belt, every one of them felt it. The silent, psychic scream of a dozen ships being tortured forever. It was a message, a lesson. And for the first time, the lesson was understood. For the first time, the enemy knew fear, not the logical assessment of a threat, but the raw, primal terror of a creature in a trap. The perfect unity of their consciousness began to fray. Imagine a mind as vast as a solar system. Now imagine that mind being stabbed. The shock was absolute. Their perfect logic shattered. Their shared thoughts became a maelstrom of confusion and terror. Ships in orbit over Jupiter suddenly changed course for no reason. Terraforming projects on Venus halted mid-process. The seamless, silent efficiency of their empire stuttered. It was like watching a god have a seizure. Their unity had been their shield. It allowed for flawless coordination, instantaneous decision-making. But you had turned it into a weapon against them. You made their own mind a torture chamber. The pain of one became the pain of all. The cracks began to show. They were no longer a monolith. They were a shattered consciousness, a billion minds screaming in unison. And they finally looked at you. And they saw not dust. They saw a monster. The dynamic shifted. You were no longer the prey. You were the predator. You stopped hiding in the ruins of your world. You took the fight to them. Your ships were few. They were fragile things made of scrap and desperation. But they carried the deadliest weapon in the universe. They carried the idea of pain. You became hunters in the dark void. You stalked their patrols. You haunted their supply lines. You didn't need to win battles. You just needed to inflict a wound. A single ship screaming in the dark was worth more than 1,000 destroyed hulls. They started to avoid certain sectors of space, the places where your ghosts lived. Their grand project of remaking our solar system faltered. They were too busy looking over their shoulders, too busy fighting the monster in their own heads. You were that monster. Humanity had become the thing that goes bump in the night, the whisper of dread in the cold between the stars. And they were very, very afraid of the dark. In your hunt, you learned more about them. You captured their data cores, not for technology, but for knowledge. You had to understand the nature of your enemy. The truth was more shocking than you could have imagined. They were architects without pain, an ancient, ancient race. They had evolved on a world without predators, without natural disaster, without competition, a planetary garden of perfect safety. They never developed the biological or psychological responses to harm. No adrenaline, no fear, no concept of suffering. Their evolution was a straight line towards intelligence and engineering. They were brilliant and incomplete. They saw the universe as a resource to be ordered, a chaotic system to be made efficient. They were not evil. They were simply immoral, a force of nature like a glacier, unstoppable and unfeeling. Until you taught them how to feel. You had found the flaw in gods. They were brilliant children who had never scraped a knee. And you had just pushed them down a flight of concrete stairs. The revelation was profound and deeply disturbing. A question began to whisper in the halls of your hidden bases. It was first spoken by a young pilot, one who had broadcast the agony chorus into a captured ship. Her face was pale. Her hands would not stop shaking. She looked at you and asked, "What have we become?" The question hung in the air, heavier than any weapon. You had looked into the abyss of your enemy's soul and found it empty. So you had filled it with your own darkness. You saw it in the eyes of your soldiers. The grim satisfaction had faded. It was replaced by a hollow weariness. They were not celebrating their victories. They were mourning them. You had become monsters to fight monsters. But who would save you from yourselves? The debate raged. Were you any better than them? They destroyed your world out of indifference. You were destroying their spirit out of malice. It was a mirror you did not want to look into. But the reflection was undeniable. You were becoming what you beheld. The war had to end, not just for their sake, but for yours. Every broadcast of pain chipped away at your own humanity. You needed a final move, a weapon to end it all. You did not design another bomb. You did not plan another ambush. You created a signal. The culmination of all your terrible work. It was a broadcast aimed at a single target, their homeworld. The weapon was not designed to kill them. It was not meant to cause physical pain. It was more subtle and far more cruel. It was a single, concentrated dose of pure, undiluted despair. You packaged every ounce of humanity's suffering into that signal. The fear of the first arrival, the sorrow for 1 billion dead, the rage of a futile defense, the agony of your own monstrous transformation. You were going to teach their entire species what it meant to lose hope. Preparing the broadcast was the most difficult thing you had ever done. It felt like building your own tomb. You knew that once you sent this signal, there was no coming back. Not for them, and not for you. The signal went out, a whisper across the unimaginable distance of space. It traveled for months, a silent messenger carrying the weight of a world's sorrow. You waited. You did not know what to expect. And then, it happened. A change. It was not sudden or violent. It was a great stillness. Across the solar system, their ships stopped. The lights on their hulls went dark. Their engines went cold. The great machine of their empire just ceased to be. They did not fire back. They did not send a message. They just retreated. Not in a physical sense. They retreated into themselves. Their empire fell silent. The terraforming projects were abandoned mid-construction. The patrol fleets drifted aimlessly in the void. They left you alone in a solar system that was now yours again. But it was a victory that felt like a funeral. You had won. The war was over. Humanity was safe. You stood under your own sun again, in a sky free of their perfect, terrible shapes. You had achieved the impossible. You had defeated gods. But a strange quiet settled over your world. You had secured your future. You had guaranteed your survival. You had taught the masters of the stars a lesson they would never forget. But at what cost? Their pain is now an echo in your own soul. You listen to the silence between the stars, and you can almost hear it. The ghost of a scream you created. You are the victors. You are the survivors. You are the monsters who taught the universe how to hurt. And you are utterly and completely alone. The darkness you fought is gone. But the darkness you became will be with you forever.